Okay, great. You should all be able to see my screen now. So yeah, again, I'm Craig. I started a company called Scheme Designers. Just very briefly, we've been doing paint scheme design and vinyl design for the past 23 plus years. In that time, we've finished about 14,000 paint schemes. 14,000 plus. We've got clients in over 150 countries. In some countries, the majority of aircraft in that country we've done, which is kind of interesting. Of course, those are very little countries. Most of our clients are in the US. The majority of our clients are individual owners of anything from small RV3s to private 747s and everything in between. We also do a lot of airlines. And we do a lot of manufacturer factory paint schemes. The majority of manufacturers use us as the internal design department. So many of the things you'll see in magazines, many of the certified companies, light sport companies, you'll see in magazines is all, or a lot of it is our work. Sometimes I can go through Flying Magazine or AOPA Pilot, for example, and half the photos in the magazine are the result of work that we've done at Scheme Designers. Let's get started. This is not intended in any way to be a sales presentation. I'm just giving you background so you know the type of experience that I'm bringing when we talk about paint scheme designs. I will be glad to sell you at any other time though. Now, if I can just get my computer to work, life would be good. Okay, good. So to get started, except if you own a Zenith, when you design any kind of paint scheme, you have to start with the premise or the understanding that just about every aircraft out there is beautiful. Some are beautiful in their own way, but generally the shape of your aircraft, which is nice and aerodynamic, is normally a beautiful shape to start with. And one of the things you want to keep in mind from the moment you start thinking about paint scheme or vinyl designs is that you want to only enhance that. Coming up with designs that detract from the beauty of your aircraft, to me, doesn't make sense. And so we really do use an art follows form theory whenever we're designing a paint scheme. A lot of what I'm going to give you is some of the negatives that you find in the industry, and you can learn from other people's mistakes. And one of the most common things when we start talking about paint scheme design is why bother? And so the first little bit is why spend time designing your paint scheme? Classic, many paint shops have told me, is the napkin drawing. Most literally, it's guys sitting at the coffee shop the day before, the morning, he's dropping his plane off the paint shop, making up a quick scribble. Larry, if you could just make sure my mouse, you can see my mouse, just wave to me if you can. Okay, good. So this is a napkin drawing that a paint shop provided to me. It's typically a rough sketch. And the real issue with the rough sketch going to the paint shop is you leave way too much up to a guy who you probably don't know too well or don't know at all, who's in charge of laying out a paint scheme on your aircraft. So just a couple of little things, for example, the N number. Well, this is just scribbled on in a font that doesn't work for the FAA. It's missing the N. It's in a place where it would be wrapping at the rear around at the top of the fuselage. Basically, it wasn't thought out. I see there's a black line here and a blue split base on this aircraft. In some areas, there's a bit of silver space between them. In other areas, there's no silver space. Some guys got to make that decision. So as you can see very quickly, something that is not an ugly paint scheme, but not very well thought out, can cause a lot of headache in a paint shop. And the real headache is when you come and pick up your aircraft from the paint shop and your vision of what you thought you were drawing doesn't match what the tape guy laid onto your aircraft. And by that time, it's too late and you pays your money and goes on your way. Another very common way that I see people approach paint jobs is to take pictures off the internet or bring an ad from a magazine or an article from a magazine and say, I want it this way. And you know, in some cases, like with this Bonanza, you might have a Bonanza A36 and you come in with this picture and you say, this is what I want. Exactly. And the paint shop says, great, we can lay that out by eye. But then you often add in little issues, like I've made up some things here, like, oh, by the way, I've got tip tanks. Well, how's the paint shop supposed to know how to integrate this wingtip design into a tip tank? That takes quite a lot of thought and can often look quite ugly. Or, you know, this is November 411 Papa Echo. It's a relatively short number because the ones only take up a 2-inch space. You happen to have November 999 Whiskey Whiskey. W's are 12 inches wide, 9s are 8 inches wide, and suddenly there's no space for the N number to fit in and remain legal. Which again, you leave the guy in the paint shop scratching his head saying, what do I do now? Worse yet, you come in and you say, I've got a Piper Aztec and I want this Baron scheme on my aircraft. Now you're asking a guy to interpret a scheme from one aircraft type to another similar airframe type, but a very different looking aircraft. And you get what you get when you go and pick up the plane. So this is by far one of the worst ways to have your plane painted, by just handing over a photo. What you do need to do is really spend time and effort on your paint scheme. After all, this is the way most people are going to look at your plane and judge your plane. If you've built something and someone sees it on the ramp, or you see it when you open the hangar, the first thing you see is the way the aircraft looks and how the paint scheme represents it. So an ugly or badly thought out paint job immediately detracts and people don't look any deeper. You could have every screw turned to the same angle, the wiring being absolutely perfect, an engine you can eat off, and nobody cares because they don't come closer to have a look. So start early and do a lot of research, which I'm going to show you some good ways to do that. And then take time to design carefully and to really mull over the designs you present, and then to prepare renderings that actually show the paint shop what it is you really want. So the best ways that all of us can do research is, of course, the magazine subscriptions we get, whether you're in get sport aviation from EAA or the AOPA pilot magazine or flying magazine or any number of magazines. Start keeping a file. Take photos. When you see a nice plane, take a photo with your camera and just keep it there for reference, not to copy, but to understand something that you liked. And remember, if you've got an RV-8A and you see a Piper Seneca that you really like, it's still relevant. It still gives you thoughts to design. So all types of planes are relevant no matter what type of plane you have. Of course, most of us are going to spend more time on the internet. I can shamelessly say you can go to our website at Scheme Designers and look at umpteen samples of many different types of aircraft. More effectively, though, and more honestly, I'd say sites like airliners.net are probably my favorite sites for looking at aircraft. They've got millions of juried photographs of just about every type of plane, including tiger moths that you've ever heard of. And there you can find things you like, save them to a file, and start collecting items that give you an understanding of what you like. Sometimes you don't know what you like when you start this process, but after you've looked at it for a little bit, you know, you come out and you say, yes, I like polka dots all over my plane, or I want a tiger's mouth on the front, or I like straight lines, or whatever. And so this type of research is designed to understand your styling. And while we talk about styling, there are a few basic styles and things to think about. One are flowing lines. So this is a vinyl design that we did for Remos, for example. And it's just clean flowing lines that in some ways show off the flow of air of an aircraft. It could be something retro, like we did on this older 182. We started with an original Cessna scheme from 1960 something. I think it was 63, but I can't quite remember. And then we added a few modern twists and did a few interesting things and ended up with a very clean looking 182. You could go fairly edgy like this 172, where you're using more of this sharp corners and sharp lines in the design. You could say you like flowing lines, such as this Learjet over here, that really represent flow, and both of these aircraft that have split bases. A split base is when half the aircraft is one color, red in the case of the Learjet and silver in the rest of it, or blue and white in the case of the 172. Or you could go really unusual. This is a firefighting aircraft that we did a whole fleet of on all their different planes for Coulson up in Canada. And they really went to town on this very dramatic digital camo-based scheme. So you can learn what you like and what you don't like. And that's an important starting point for any design. Before you do design, you really need drawings of the aircraft. And if you're going to have drawings, you need accurate drawings. And I know some of you are probably thinking already, oh yeah, how am I going to draw up accurate drawings? It's easy. You just send me an email and I'll send you a drawing. It's as simple as that, except for the tiger moth. I haven't done a design on the tiger moth. But if any of you need designs, you just drop me drawings, you just drop me an email. It doesn't cost you anything, and I'll be happy to share drawings of your aircraft. A couple of things when you're drawing up the drawings is you want to think early about N number. So for a lot of the kit-built aircraft, you go down to 3-inch numbers, in which case they don't figure prominently in the design, which is why I'm showing the RV without any N number on. However, on this 182RG, if you want a 12-inch N number, it takes up a major part of the rear fuselage. And so you want to have that sized and in or around the drawing right at the get-go. The most common error I see when people are initiating design is not looking at the plane and the ground attitude. We're all Walter Mitty. We all love our planes, which we can't see while we're flying them, but when we imagine them in the flight attitude. And I particularly selected this 182RG as a tricycle gear aircraft because it sits tail low on the ground. So if you design a scheme that works around the waterline of the aircraft, in the neutral horizontal line in flight, your scheme will start to look tail heavy on the ground. And then in particular, when you've got a tail dragger, you definitely want to consider it both in the flight and the ground attitude, which we always do both ways. Now, I'm going to start talking about little elements that make up different designs. And the easiest place to start is straight lines, because all of us can draw straight lines. In fact, the first plane I ever painted for myself was a Cardinal RG. And I basically used this exact scheme that's on this Archer because I didn't know how to work graphics programs way back then. And Microsoft Paint didn't allow you to do good curves, and I got frustrated and ended up with straight lines. So, you know, talk about a strange reason for developing a paint scheme, but that was my reason for my straight line scheme. There are good and there are bad ways to execute straight lines. And the one thing about straight lines is, yeah, this is not the most modern looking scheme, but on the other hand, it's not dated. These schemes don't go out of fashion. When you see, I call these Mooney schemes because that's really where these kind of laser stripes started. When you see a Mooney in its original factory laser scheme, it still looks modern today, 20-something years later. What I like to do if I'm using straight line elements like this is match the horizon. So you can see that these 3 silver stripes on this Archer are pretty much parallel to the ground, or the horizon if it was straight, but to the ground. A common mistake I see, which is illustrated on this Bonanza, is to pick up an element on the aircraft and force the lines to match that element. So in this case, everything's parallel to the lower edges of the windows. What happens in this case, the aircraft sits a little tail low, and so this just exacerbates the tail low look of the aircraft when the stripe goes from higher to lower down the side of the fuselage. Size is another interesting element. You don't want to make the stripes too big, like this Bonanza, because they just end up shortening the plane and looking odd. The whole scheme is odd, although it's an interesting idea. It just doesn't really suit a Bonanza. You don't want to make them too thin that when you walk away from the plane, they just blend into each other. This Archer has about the smallest stripes that I would like to see, and they're likely 1/2 inch wide with 1/2 inch spacing to give you a reference. So horizontal lines, keep them elegant, and don't get too big or too small with your lines, too fat or too skinny. Of course, most of us like to use curves, and those can be done very effectively, unlike this RV10 that I'm showing you here, which is probably laid out by somebody who is blindfolded. So let's show you some of the things on curves to avoid. So first of all, why curves? To me, curves illustrate airflow over an aircraft when done correctly. And as pilots, we look at that and we naturally see movement of our aircraft through the air when you've got a paint scheme that illustrates airflow. And curves do that very well. And in fact, this scheme could have worked really beautifully if it had a smooth convex curve over the wing and then a bit of a concave curve up to the tail. Instead, what they did for some reason is they flat spotted everything. So they came up here with a slight curve and then a sudden corner there. And then they went flat for a while. Then they had more of curve and then flat for a while, and so on. And so you completely lost the flow of the scheme. So curves are great, and curves to me occur in 98% of all paint schemes I design. Another interesting thing to talk about over here, which is not strictly related to curves, is white spaces. White spaces are designed, they don't happen by accident. In this case, the white spaces are too wide. And when you start thinking about it in that respect, the stripe becomes disconnected from the split base over here. What you want to do is think about the white spaces, or the negative spaces would be a better way to say it in case the plane's not white. Think about those negative spaces as individual design elements. Another trick whenever you're doing spaces between colors, which is a good thing we'll talk about later, is to make those spaces equal to tape widths that are common, like 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, 1 inch, 1 1/4 inch, and so on, which means that one piece of tape will be used just to define a perfectly spaced set of stripes, or in this case, a stripe and a split base. Here's a scheme that I think curves were executed very well. So now you'll see that all the curves of the aircraft here are smooth flowing lines. The spaces are fairly tight and clean. There's no variation in the size of the space over here. When you do want variation, it's intentional and you can tell. Often when people lay things out badly, they'll have varying spaces between the colors, and that just looks awkward. So to me, this is one of my favorite uses of curves, and it shows you how elegant and interesting you can make an aircraft look. Another element that I use a lot in design is the split base, so the half one color, half another color. And I most commonly use a bottom split base, so the bottom has some darker color. One of my primary motivations is because the majority of planes I've ever owned have been singles, and my kids are already getting big, and I have no one to climb under the aircraft to wash it. So I like to keep the time between washes as low as possible, TBW I call it. And if you, want it as high as possible. So a high TBW is good. I could get away with washing my plane once a year. I'm very happy with that. So all the oil and whatnot that might come out of your engine then gets hidden by the split base. And that helps greatly. But more than that, I find them to be very elegant. They make a plane look a little larger and give it more ramp appeal. And so I use it commonly. This was one I did, I forget where the guy was, in Czechoslovakia or something. But this was actually done based on a Cessna paint scheme, Cessna factory paint scheme, and really turned into one of my favorite paint schemes I ever did on a Duke. And there's nothing wrong with doing split bases on the top. Just keep in mind that in some aircraft where you've got an aluminum top to your cabin area, you're really going to significantly impact the heat in the cabin if you park outside or if you're out on the ramp at Oshkosh for a week. It can significantly raise the temperatures, which of course damages your avionics, damages your seat material, or at least reduces their life. Of course, if you've gotten RV8, it doesn't make any difference. The canopy is a fishbowl anyway, and at the back of the fuselage or the cowling has a bit of extra heat in it. Doesn't matter. So it's really the concern is when you've got a cabin, if you want a dark top. A common feature that you'll find on a lot of schemes are cowling treatments. Some people say that they're in place because they reduce glare. Yeah, maybe that works if you've got a fighter and glare is that critical. I had a Piper Lance for a long time that had the biggest schnoz of any plane I've ever owned. It was white, and I can't say there was ever a time where I was holding my hands in front of my eyes saying, oh, the glare off my cowling is blinding me. So I use cowling treatments purely aesthetically. Sometimes I'll use them to balance a paint scheme when I've got, and we'll go into this a little more later, but when I've got a lot of weight on the rear of the fuselage artistically, I'll use cowling treatment to kind of create some balance. Other times it just looks nice. And I think there's good and bad ways to do it. One thing I like to do, which is illustrated, I believe this is a 78 Cessna factory paint scheme. You'll notice that the sick mustard yellowy color over here, browny color, maybe it's baby shit brown color, excuse me, comes to the bottom of the windshield retainer. I like to leave the windshield retainer white. I think it looks very neat. Also, if you have to maintain your windows or get to the top of your panel and they need to take the windshield out, you're going to cause the least damage and you're only going to touch up a bit of white paint if you're using white as a base. Whereas this Bonanza, that's not the case. I'm not crazy about the way this Bonanza is done. And while I'm here, I also don't like the uneven spacing that's going on between the gold stripe and the edge of the black, and then the lower gold stripe and the edge of the black. Just one other thing to look at. So what you should be getting as we're going through this is when I look at an aircraft, I look at a lot of little details. It's the little details that often make the difference. Another thing I don't like about this paint scheme and this cowling treatment, and something to think about when you're doing your design, is back to the negative space. I don't like the shape of the negative space going on here with this S curve on the black. You get a strange shape to the silver here, which doesn't really flow with the whole front end of the aircraft. And to me, that jumps out at me and says, not so nice. Whereas this old-fashioned simple wedge shape, I think works better, even though the scheme is somewhat dated. Some of us have choices whether to polish or paint a spinner. Another thing to consider, obviously, if you have an aircraft with a fiberglass spinner, you're going to paint it. But with the Cardinal, for example, for Larry, you could strip that spinner, polish it, and have a polished spinner on the front end. There's a couple of things to consider. Some planes we've only ever seen with polished, or 90% of the time we see them with polished spinners and they just look right. A Cirrus is an example of that. They've been made with polished spinners from the beginning. Bonanzas are another common one. Cessnas, however, for the most part, most of the Cessnas out there have painted spinners, maybe not the newer ones. And so we're used to seeing painted spinners. And when I look at it, one thing it does is the plane starts at the point of the spinner and goes all the way back. Whereas with the Bonanza, the plane starts at the back of the spinner. And so it actually shortens the aircraft a little bit visually. So sometimes painted spinners can actually be used to your advantage. One last thing on spinners that I have to point out and that really aggravates me is when people don't paint the spinner the right color when they're painting it. So for example, on this aircraft, if you painted the spinner white or red, I call that a Mickey Mouse spinner because it's got a nose that sticks out. It really draws your attention and ruins the whole paint job. And so what my rule is to take the cowling, the color on the top of the cowling, and carry that to the spinner. So if you've got a white top of the cowling, then the spinner will end up white. In this case, if you've got this funny brown color, it'll end up brown. Now, most of us will start imagining our paint scheme based on the fuselage more than any other elements. I mean, occasionally I do a design where the wings are the leading criteria, or someone has something special to do on the tail and the design flows from there. But 95% of the time, I'm starting with the fuselage. And I get whatever design I want on the fuselage. And then I am using the other surfaces, the wingtips, in this case, wingtip tanks, the wing roots, the top of the tail, and so on, to balance and enhance the design. So we'll talk about balance first. As pilots, we inherently understand weight and balance in our aircraft. We know when we're overloading our aircraft front or back, when we're moving the CG too far forward or aft with our loading. We understand that, and the same goes for a paint scheme design. You can look at a paint scheme design and decide, no, this looks nose heavy or it looks tail heavy. And one of the clever ways to deal with that is to add treatment to the top of the cowling or treatment to the top of the tail. So often that's going to dictate what and how much paint you put in those areas. The next important part of doing those ancillary areas, which we're going to talk a lot about, is what I call a suit and tie theory. Now, a few of us these days wear suits and ties. I know I can't even remember the last time I wore a suit and tie, especially not now during COVID, because I barely left my office. But we understand if we have a gray suit with a certain color pinstripe in it, we know what color shirt to have in, what color socks to have, what color tie works. And I look at the fuselage of the aircraft as the suit, and everything else is the shirt and the socks and the tie and the lapel pin and whatever else you use to make yourself look good. And so we want to make sure that everything matches. And what I mean by that, if you analyze this fuselage paint scheme, so you'll see a red split base with an S curve on it. You've got a light gold stripe starting far forward and trending away from the red. And then tucked inside, you can't see it behind the wingtip tank, but you can see it on the photo. Tucked inside, you've got a darker gold stripe that starts and also trends away from the red. So you've kind of set a pattern for the major gold stripes. And then finally, you've got this little gold pinstripe, which unfortunately doesn't show up well in that photo, but you've got this little gold pinstripe within the red. When you look just at the tail element, well, let's start with the wingtip tank, then I'll go to the tail. You'll see the fuselage scheme is completely replicated on here. So I was able to get a perfectly matching setup between tip tank and fuselage. Similarly on the tail, I got a good matching setup, but you'll notice the dark gold stripes missing. And the reason for that was I took this gold stripe all the way onto the tail, so I felt it was sufficiently represented. But you'll still see all the elements are represented and all tied into what's going on the fuselage. Similarly, on the wing root, you can see the same approach is being taken. So I've got all segments of the aircraft tied into what in this design my primary segment was, which was the fuselage. This is an example of two really negative things. So this is a factory scheme from Cirrus that is only available to buyers in Brazil. And any of you who copy this will be sued, so be careful. Because Cirrus protects its paint schemes, that wasn't a joke. So this is a good example of a tail-heavy paint scheme design. Cirruses sit fairly flat, and yet this aircraft is looking like it's sitting back down like a Bonanza, for example, because of all this red that's concentrated really behind the center of gravity aft. This also has a Mickey Mouse nose, which really aggravates me. That's what I was talking about with a Mickey Mouse nose. It looks like it was an afterthought and just plunked on the front. To me, if I had that black spinner there, I'd want some black on the top of the cowling or something like that. So this is a really good illustration in my mind of how not to do a good visual weight and balance on your aircraft. Now, for those of us with low-wing aircraft, you can really go to town on the wing. So this was my Piper Lance that I did in 2005. And I noticed when I bought the aircraft, I'd been a Cessna person before that. And when I was doing cross countries, I noticed that it seemed like 80% of my view was the wing. And then there was just a little triangle of space that I could see the ground, because you sit quite, right on the main spar, and your bum's even a little back behind that. So I thought I would spend my money on really going to town on the wings. Like a lot of RVs and older Cherokees and whatnot, the Hershey wings don't look so elegant from any angle. And so what I wanted to do was to create something that looked elegant from the cockpit. So again, let's start with the suit and tie part again and analyze this paint scheme a little bit. A smooth S-shaped curved I used over here. A single stripe, because I didn't have much money to afford it anymore, that trended away from the black and got narrower front to back. And then on the tail, I did the exact opposite. The gold stripe starts at a point and widens and trends away. You'll notice that I picked up the tail design, which is the inverse of the fuselage, on the wingtips and the wing roots. And then to change the shape of the wing, I put this bold S-curve, actually top and bottom. And it completely changed up the whole way the aircraft looked. This photograph was actually taken over Maryland, by the way. Maybe some of you recognize it. It's very tough when you're doing anything over Zoom, because you don't know if anyone laughs. It's just stupid jokes. At any rate, so I found that after I'd done that, this whole wing looked so elegant. Whenever you were turning and you were looking out over the wing, going, cutting across the ground, it just looked so beautiful. And so that's really where I spent my money. Keep in mind, why do I say spend my money? On this fuselage, I've got a single stripe and a black split base. On this, and it's on two sides. On this wing, I got 3 gold stripes and 2 split bases on 2 surfaces on 2 wings. So there's a lot more going on the wings than's going on the fuselage, and the cost to do those wings is more than the cost of the fuselage. So if you've got something really complicated and cost is a consideration, just remember you're creating 4 times more work when you're going onto the wings for layout and painting. And so that doesn't always come that cheap. But in some cases, it's really worthwhile. This is another really good example of tying elements together. You'll notice this is a theme I've come back to several times because I think it's so important. This I did way back in 2004. It was the AOPA sweepstakes aircraft for that year. And it's a very interesting design. There's actually a lot to talk about on it. This was a 1960 twin Comanche. And what I wanted to do on this design was pick up a retro element that came off the original design. I wanted a nod to where this aircraft came from, but yet we were doing such dramatic work on the aircraft. I wanted to show that this, wasn't a 1960s aircraft, but rather, in this case, a 2004 twin Comanche. So you'll notice these arrowheads over here, the black and silver areas here. That was the element of that original twin Comanche. And the scheme that it generated, the blue, black, and silver stripes, are just straight line, straight edge stripes nose to tail, with the only curve being the definition of the arrowhead on the front. So in itself, a fairly boring scheme. That you'll see replicated on the nacelle, on the wingtip tank, and to a lesser extent, because you've got to have some curves somewhere for me, on the tail. If I'd stopped there, it would have been a clean, neat aircraft, and nobody would have looked. What we did was we used this color changing paint, which I'll talk about more later, and we made these dramatic zigzags. So we had both a color element and a design element that had a lot of movement to it. That was all very simple at the end of the day. There's nothing complex about the zigzag and the little swoosh here on the tail. But it added such movement to the design and completely changes the simple, easy design that was underneath into something dramatic and interesting. And then you'll notice it was replicated again on the nacelle. Couldn't really replicate on the tail without getting just too much. So we continued it onto the tail with a smooth, elegant curve. And on the wingtip tank, we didn't have enough surface area to get a whole zigzag, but we got the front part of it. And so that created a pretty dynamic design. But the key thing to look at once you've understood some of the design thought that went into it is how the wingtip tank, the nacelle, and the nose are all flying in formation and all are dressed to perfection against my suit and tie criteria. Now, back to wingtips. If you've got a high wing aircraft, particularly anything with a droop tip like the Cardinal that Larry has, but anything with a droop tip, generally I spend a lot less time on the wingtip and wing design. Not time, I spend a lot less design effort on it because you can't really see the wing. Your eye is almost at wing level. You see surfaces from very oblique angles. And so it seems to me always pointless putting a lot of design and money into painting your wing. And I normally try and talk clients out of that. Particularly in this 210, for example, the top of your head is above the window line when you're sitting in a 210 and with this 182. And when you look out on the wing, you don't really see the wing because it's such an oblique angle. You just see a little bit of the underside of the wingtip. So what I generally do is I'll concentrate any design work on the vertical surface, the vertical outboard and upper surface of the wing. Because as you walk around the plane, that's the part that has the most impact for you. And again, tie it into whatever's going on the aircraft. And I generally will leave it at that. If you've got an aircraft with just rounded wingtips or squared off wingtips that don't have any kind of droop like this, I'll often just make them a single solid color and leave it at that. If you do like color on your wing root, and this is not that relevant unless other people have joined who may have a retractable gear aircraft. But if you've got an aircraft where the wheels are attached to the wing like a Cherokee, or an aircraft like this Bonanza where the wheels are attached quite far outboard, you want to understand where those wheels are when you're thinking about the design on the wings. This again is back to that AOPA Bonanza, and you'll notice I've got this black line drawn in here, and that represents the upper edge of the gear door, or the most outboard edge of the wheel well. And so I keep design outboard of that area so that my gear door ends up being a solid color. A more natural point on this wing to start your wing root treatment, one would think, would be this kink in the leading edge. But if you do that, you end up like this Bonanza in Russia, where you have stripes suddenly going through the gear door, and to me that looks like a mistake. So I do everything to avoid that mistake. So just be aware of it. Here's another example on this Duke where there's color under the nacelle, but the wing area between the nacelle and the fuselage is white. And this folds into that area. So you get a whole bit of white on the bottom of the wing of the gear door, and it just looks silly to me. No one has winglets, so I'm not going to focus on that particular. If someone does, shout out to me and I'll go back to it. Okay, so remember I said design in the ground attitude. This is really important. These are two interesting designs to look at to illustrate what I see when I look at aircraft that are not designed or designed in the ground attitude. So to me, this one in Europe is not designed in the ground attitude. As I did this one, I know I designed it in the ground attitude. Over here, if you look at the slope of the curves, the design itself is actually quite a fun design and has some nice elements. It's not an ugly design, but when I look at it, the flow of these curves make the plane sit further down. Makes it sit more nose high when I look at it. And to me, that's a negative. What I want on an aircraft is to somewhat flatten the ground attitude to make it look like it wants to go a little bit. And what I do is I use the point where the color rounds the cowling or the stripes start, you could, if this didn't have a split base, you could use the point where the black stripe starts. And I draw an imaginary line to where the color's going off. And if that line is flatter than the water line, the horizontal line in flight of the aircraft, I'm starting to achieve my goals and starting to make the plane look a little bit more aggressive when it's sitting on the ground in terms of flying and having speed to it. So that's why it's so important to think about ground attitude when you're doing a design. Wheel pants are an important consideration that are often not thought of very carefully. So I've got a couple of RV14s. Both of them we worked on. One I think is really good and one I think is a really bad idea. And I say that as someone who drew them both. So the really good one is the black and purple one. And there, again, I've got a tie into the scheme, so that's a good part. But what I like here is the color that I've used has been focused on the top of the gear pans, of the wheel covers at least. Whereas when you look at the RV14A at the bottom, the color's focused on the bottom. So why do I like one over the other? What catches my eye is the white, the height of white between the aircraft and the color on the wheel pants. So here it's pretty tight and Porsche-like, low slung. Here it's like a minivan standing on stilts. And that makes a huge difference to my eye. To me, this plane looks like it's sitting high, and in my eye, that immediately means it's a slower aircraft, even though they're the same aircraft. Now, I will say I didn't have a choice over here because I just designed the vinyl stripes. Carl had purchased the aircraft with the blue painted on it already, and we had to come up with some design to make it interesting. So I'm not 100% guilty, and there was not much I could do if we didn't want to repaint the wheel pants. So I moaned about it, and then we got on with life. So that's an important consideration, and all the other rules I've talked about ad nauseum now apply in terms of suit and tie design and tying the elements in properly. If you've got a retractable gear aircraft, you want to make sure that they're excuse me, having a bit of mental dyslexia going on here. You want to make sure that your landing gear legs are painted white for easy maintenance and pre-flighting. Similarly, I keep the insides of the wheel wells white, again, pre-flighting. And then I go a step further in that I'll do the inside of the gear doors white. Now this plane was a light gray, so those whites are actually all light gray. But if you look here at the main gear door right here, you can see it's the light gray on the inside here. Similarly in the nose gear, you can see it's gray on the inside here. And then we used white on the legs themselves. To me, this is a safety issue. And it also looks factory new. And even though many of us are building aircraft, I look at even a plane that we're building in our garage or hangar as something that should look like it was built in a factory. And to me, this always jumps out as not looking factory-like when I see aircraft with painted landing gear, especially retractable gear Cessnas. I have a big problem with that for some reason. Now we get on to my favorite type of aircraft, which is the ugly duckling of aircraft, which is just about any Zenith ever made. And I know Zenith are great aircraft, and so I apologize in advance to Mark and Ernest for insulting Zeniths, but I told you this is going to happen. A Zenith might be a fantastic aircraft to fly, and it may be tougher than tough, but they're nothing to look at. The lines of the aircraft are very ungainly in my mind. And every time I design a scheme for any kind of Zenith, whether it's a 601 or a 701 or an 801 in this case, I'm always thinking, how do I get around this? Now, the low wing one is a little prettier than the high wing one, but not by much. What I'm illustrating over here is a way to do design where you throw all the rules that I've just given you, every single one of them out the door, and you do what I call distracting design. So now instead of designing for the form of the aircraft, you're coming up with creative ways to create design for design's sake. And you're doing it to distract from the shape of the aircraft or the shape of an element on the aircraft. This may be an ugly window line, like the windows on a Piper Lance. I took a stripe through the windows because I thought, let me just quickly run up and show you that before I finish insulting Zeniths. You see here, this has got a very ugly window line. I purposely took a stripe through the windows to distract from that window line. So I was just looking at these 3 rear windows, which are all odd sizes and don't flow together. Let's go back to the Zenith. In this case, I used a wispy, almost airbrush look of camouflage on the aircraft. And we designed a maple leaf element with a little bit of color to make it really stand out. And the effect of that is it draws your eye when you look at the aircraft. So instead of looking at the ungainly shape of the aircraft, you're drawn to the detail that's in this tail design. Similarly, I painted red inside the fixed slats. So as you're wandering around this plane, you catch this very rich red, and it causes you to look a second time and say, oh, what's that? So again, it draws you to an interesting element of the aircraft as opposed to the aircraft as a whole. And a distracting design could be any camouflage pattern. It could be zigzags. It could be a snake drawn on the plane. It could be anything. This is just the sample that I happened to pick for this presentation. So canards present a whole different problem. I don't believe we've got any canards in the audience, so I'm not going to waste your time on this particular element. Again, if I jump over something and I'm wrong, just hit your space bar and tell me, and I'll go on to it. So we've discussed a lot of different elements of paint scheme design, and now we're going to talk about some special effects and how they affect design. Some of these are easy to do, some of them are expensive to do, and whenever you're doing something a little unusual and out of the ordinary, you need to consider, once you get over any additional expense, that A, you won't tire of it, because sometimes dramatic looking paint schemes look great the day you pick it up, but a few years later you're wondering why you ever did that. Sometimes they're tough to maintain. It is a consideration. Very importantly, some of them are tough to sell. So you might do something really dramatic on your RV8A and comes to get on the market and it's the only RV8A that doesn't sell. So think about that too. So let's look at a couple of things to start with. And one of the things, the reason I picked this Baron, which is not a scheme I did, I just found it on the internet and I thought it was very interesting. Fades from yellow all the way through this purple and then all the way back to yellow. That is extremely hard to do. And the painter who did this is extremely talented when it comes to fades. The shorter the distance a fade occurs over, the easier it is to do. So when you're doing fades over the whole length of the aircraft, that's quite complex. And what I want you to think of is if your aircraft in this area, say, got damaged right here by the baggage door on this Baron. Now you've got to figure out, how do I properly blend all these multiple colors across the baggage door to fix the ding in the plane? You see where I'm going. This would be extraordinarily hard to repair. And then when it comes time to sell, a lot of people look at this and go, yeah, you know, nice Baron, but not for me. So this plane would sit on the market for a lot longer than something that had a more conservative scheme on it. This is a very interesting fleet design that I found. It's a flight school in South Africa, and every one of their aircraft are painted in this style, but everyone's a little different. But they make for a very interesting marketing tool, except for the Mickey Mouse cowling spinner, which should be blue in this case. They make for a very interesting marketing tool when they park next to the fence and people are driving past the airport. And this is a head turner. But especially as this is a training aircraft at a flight school, painting in this way causes several levels of problems. So the first is the maintenance problem, as I described above. You do 100-hour inspections on this aircraft, And every time you take the cowling off, you're chipping paint. When it comes time to touch up, just look at the number of colors along the edges of the cowling. And all those colors have to be touched up and blended. Either it's going to look like crap or it's going to be very expensive. The other thing you've got to consider when you're doing something like this is time. Now, if you're painting a plane yourself, time is less expensive in layout. But if you're paying a paint shop to paint your plane, time is money. And the more hours they spend doing anything, the more it's going to cost you to paint the plane. That's why when you go into a paint shop and you say, hey, give me a quotation to paint a 172, and they say $13,500, you say, great. And then you come back with this and they say, oh no, that'll be $20,000, thanks. And so here's some of the reasons. So firstly, we're just going to look at a little area. So lean in and just look at this green, yellow, and blue area below the rear window. And you'll notice that the blue touches the green and the yellow touches the blue and the green touches the blue and the yellow. So all three colors touch each other. Now think about laying out tape to define these shapes. Now it could be hand laid out or it could be pre-cut masks, but let's just say hand laid out for simplicity. So if you lay out this blue area first, you'll notice that right in this area where my mouse is, the blue tape is going to be over on top of where the green is going to go. And all along this edge, the blue tape is going to be over where the yellow is going to go. So that means the only bit you can lay out when you start is this blue area. Then you have to stop, paint the blue, let it dry, take off the tape, and then you start again. So then you'll pick a second color. So then you paint the yellow, the tape will be on top of the blue, but it'll also be where the green is going to go. So you do the yellow, paint, dry, unmask, remask the blue. See where I'm going? You're suddenly spending many hours doing a layout. I'm not saying that it's a good design idea, but let's assume they had a 1/4 inch white space between the colors here. They could lay out all three colors at once and use 1/4 inch fine line tape between the colors here to define that white space. And that would save many hours of coming back and redoing layout. So think about that when you're designing your paint scheme, that touching colors significantly impact time in the paint shop, hours spent laying out your plane, and the number of cycles the plane goes through between masking, painting, unmasking, masking, painting, unmasking. Okay. So another unique special effect is doing an airbrush design on your aircraft. And a lot of people shy away from this. But for no good reason. They can be absolutely stunning. This one, some of you, if you were at Oshkosh a couple of years ago, would have seen it. If you're at Oshkosh this year, you would have seen nothing, unfortunately, but this wasn't there. This is done by a friend of mine called John Starr, who's an absolutely incredible fine artist and airbrush artist. This obviously is a very patriotic design in this case, with very carefully worked out elements that relate to the owner, from the type of aircraft you're seeing, the tanks, the people, and so on. And there's a lot not only going on the side of the fuselage, there's a whole sky scene going on with clouds and whatnot on the top of the fuselage, Lady Liberty on the tail, and there's a whole bunch more going on the wings and even on the underside. He's got these mirrors here so people can see on the underside. So you don't have to airbrush an entire aircraft. Obviously, that does get quite time consuming. But if you wanted to do an element, let's say you wanted this element on your aircraft, some kind of nose art, you can get a local motorcycle artist or John Starr to come in and, in the middle of your paint job, apply a bit of airbrush art. So it's something you can really use effectively. And if you do little bits, it's not overly expensive. But the effects you get, like on this flag, you can't do any other way as effectively. I mean, you could put vinyl down, but it's not as long lasting and it's not going to have the same luster and effect of this paint. So if you do want some elements that are really above and beyond, that's when you call John Starr or a good airbrush artist. And they're all over the place. They're not hard to find. The reason why I keep coming back to John Starr is he's an RV builder and owner. What's he got? He's got an RV8. And he's been doing aircraft his whole career. and he understands the aircraft much better than if you bring in a motorcycle airbrush artist or someone from a local art school who does airbrushing. So bringing in an expert means that there's going to be no mistakes and no one's going to be handling any components of your aircraft that they don't understand. Just a thought. This is a design that incorporates a little bit of airbrush art. This was an aircraft we designed, and we used John Starr to do the airbrush art of the camo pattern in the middle of the design. So we designed all the stripes, and we left the space just with an idea. We took, I can't remember the name of the store, Cabela's? I just can't remember the name of the store, but I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about when this is like the hunting clothes, camouflage patterns. So we took that out of their catalog and just dropped it into the drawing to give him an illustration of the style we wanted. He then looked at that, threw it away, and created this whole detailed forest scene. I was looking at it earlier when I was getting it set up for this talk, and I couldn't see it here, but I know in here, oh, here it is. If you look right where my mouse is, you might have to come in. He even put a whole deer in there. It's like a deer, there's little snails hidden here and there, there's squirrels, there's all kinds of things. And when you look at this, you really have to look closely to see the amount of detail he put into it. And the sad thing is this guy had an accident like shortly after the plane was built by Peterson and painted. And so all this artwork, these are the only photos we'll ever get of it, which was really unfortunate because it was such a stunning looking and unusual aircraft. But that's kind of the fun things you can do with airbrush art. Another tool that I like to use is watermarks. And watermarks are fun to do, but this is a bit of an expensive one. This aircraft, which is based in New Zealand, was painted in the US. That's why it still had its US registration number on there. But he wanted to put this Maori symbol on the tail that's called a kuru. But because he's not Maori, he didn't want to have it bold and in your face, because there's a lot of sensitivity that goes on with Maori symbols in New Zealand. So I decided to put it on as a watermark. We never actually did this element down here. The aircraft still registered as with an N number in New Zealand. So ignore this element, just look at the tail. And you can see when you're looking at the plane from a distance, if you really look, you can sort of see there's something going on the tail, but it's not apparent. It's designed so that to make you look twice. You look at the plane and you say, it's strange, there's something going on the tail. And it draws you in. A good paint scheme to me is something that draws you in and makes you want to look a little deeper at the plane. And when you get close, now if you look at this photo down here, you suddenly see there's this whole pattern going on the tail that is not really apparent. Now, why is it expensive? Not for the layout, that's easy. You just use a paint mask, stick it on, and it's laid out. More because where it's over the black, you have to use a different shade of black, a different shade of white, a different shade of gold, different shade of red. That's 4 colors you're adding to already a 4-color paint scheme. That's 8 colors. That means that before you start, you're probably $2,000 to $3,000 more expensive before you've put one piece of tape on the aircraft, because every additional color adds significantly to the cost of a paint job. So the 2 stripes and white base versus the 3 stripes and white base is normally about $1,000 to $1,500 difference. Something to keep in mind when you're painting your aircraft. So if you want every color from a rainbow pattern, you're going to have a pretty expensive paint job. A fun thing to do is there are paints out there that change colors. This used to be made by DuPont. It was called Chrome Illusion. It's very hard to photograph well. But you can see up where my mouse is, it's burgundy, and down here on the lower curve of the fuselage, it's purple. And as you walk around this plane, it changes again and again from burgundy to purple. And if you stand and you look left, it's burgundy, and you look right, it's purple. And it changes in front of your face. It's really quite amazing. It is fairly expensive, but if used in just small quantities, like for just a stripe, yeah, maybe it'll add $500 to the paint job. It's an easy paint to apply. It's easy to maintain, just like any other paint. While we're here, this is a good paint scheme to illustrate some more about cost. As you'll see, this aircraft has this chrome illusion color. So this is a large use of it, and this at that time was $500 a pint, and there's, you know, probably 1.5 gallons of paint used in it. So just the paint was super expensive, probably 4 times what a pint of paint, you say that fast, what a pint of paint cost back when this was painted, which was 2003 about. I think this one was done. So this was the first woman to own a Meridian, so they made a big fuss of her. And but she came with very interesting design ideas. One was these pink stripes, but 2, she wanted a pearl white, which I hadn't really used a lot of back then. But she wanted me to find one that went with everything, and I found one that was called a rose pearl. So it was white, but you can just see where it's catching the light. It has a little pink hue to it, like just subtle patterns of pink in it, which tie into these stripes. I'm not saying you have to paint plain pink, but you can find pearl whites that have a blue hue in it, or a gray hue in it, or a gold hue in it. So you can find colors that go subtly together that really tie well. So she had this pink color, plus she's got the silver color, plus the pearl. So there were 5 colors on the aircraft, already expensive. Then she broke every rule by having all these colors touch. In fact, for those of you who know about Gantt charts and PERT charts, the charts you use when you're planning construction generally, the paint shop actually used a Gantt chart to figure out what to paint when and how to most efficiently apply this, because it was such a complex scheme to decide how to lay out. And this was by far at the time the most expensive paint scheme that had gone onto a Meridian. So it wasn't for the faint of wallet. Interestingly enough, she married another client of mine, and he also had a Meridian, and they sold the Meridians, and now they have a citation. So if you have a Meridian and you find another Meridian person to marry, there's a citation in your future. That's how I define it. My wife doesn't have a Meridian. Okay, on to some more mundane things. Don't forget when you're designing a paint scheme to think about your registration number, especially if you want a 12-inch registration number. Now, for all of you who have antique aircraft, that would include definitely the Tiger Moth. The Cardinal that we talked about earlier would be an antique aircraft, but basically anything that's over 30 years old, that's a certified aircraft, is an antique aircraft. And an antique aircraft is allowed to have 2-inch end numbers on it. 2-inch numbers with limitations. I'll get to the limitations in a moment. If you've got a kit-built plane that has a calibrated airspeed and cruise of under 180 knots, you can have 3-inch numbers. So most RVs can do 3-inch numbers. Most Lancers can't because of their cruise speed. They need 12-inch numbers. So anything faster than that has to have 12-inch numbers. And then if you've got a newer certified aircraft, you're required to have 12-inch numbers. Now, before you celebrate and go drop on your 2- and 3-inch numbers, you also have to say, where do I fly? And you guys flying, I'm assuming mostly that you're flying mostly or most of your times in the Maryland area and around, you've got exposure to the whole Washington, D.C. area, which requires 12-inch end numbers to penetrate that area. If you fly to the Bahamas, to Canada, to Mexico, or anywhere through an ADAS, the regulation says you're required to have 12-inch numbers. Canada, they're less fussy, and I've got clients that get away with it on a weekly basis when we are allowed to go to Canada. Bahamas, not so much. Mexico, definitely not so much. And where you get dinged is actually when you come back through Florida, that I've had clients who've been grounded because they pushed the limits on end numbers, which seems kind of silly, but that happens. So understand your size legally. The rules, if you want to read them, are 14 CFR Part 45. So if you just Google that, the rules will come up. Understand that these rules are so badly written by somebody who English was their third language that there's a lot of limited specificity. and a lot of gray area that we've had to go to the FAA many times to push when we're pushing the envelope a little bit on design. Placement is another consideration. You're required to be behind the trailing edge of the wing, which I consider the trailing edge of the flap. Beechcraft considers the flap not part of the wing, so they use the trailing edge of the wing, which I don't agree with, and the leading edge of the horizontal tail, or on the vertical tail or rudder, the vertical fin or rudder. So those are your placements. And then the only other thing to remember is if you need a 12-inch number, but it doesn't fit on your plane, the regulation also says, or as large as possible. Okay, so you know, if those of us who can think of a Cessna 337, very often they would put end numbers on the tail booms, and they'd only be 8 inches high, but yet they'd be legal. But interestingly enough, if you had November 1 Papa, you could fit a 12-inch number on the tail so that putting it on the tail boom was no longer legal. Because of the short end number, you had to put this great big number on the tail. So there were like a lot of like gotchas in these regulations. So if you have a question, it's probably easier to call me, because if you've got that question, I've probably had to deal with it already. So just call me and I'll give you help with the answer without legal fees, although without liability too. So placement is important in the design, which I spoke about earlier when we were talking about the drawings. And here's a couple of reasons why. One, you look at this Cessna. I didn't do this design and don't particularly like it, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's elegant, it's well spaced, and it's a fine design. But with this great big registration number in the middle, the whole flow of the design just stops at the end number and starts afterwards and is broken. And your center of focus becomes this black registration number. So the color is wrong. The placement related to this, God, having a hard time talking tonight. Let me just get some water. Excuse me one sec. Okay, the placement related to the design is also wrong. I mean, this design could have easily been put, the end number could have easily be put underneath the stripes rather than in the middle of the stripes. So think about placement, and certainly do not leave it up to your paint shop, because they will screw it up like they did with this 210. In this 210, this design comes off a website that used to just sell designs. None of their drawings that you could buy had any dimensions at all or any registration numbers, and usually didn't ever consider registration numbers. So this design was applied by the paint shop, and the only place they could figure to put in the registration number was at this funny angle, which to me makes the fuselage look bent, right at the point of the rear window over here. It's just kind of shoved in. So there's really good ways to screw up a paint scheme without thinking about the end number. I think I've emphasized that enough. Remember, there are many different ways you can do end number styles. Here they all are: planes, italic, blocked, which means you've got a shadow that's like a three-dimensional block behind it. Straight shadowed, this is a straight shadow. The shadow's not connected to the end number. Outlines, I have an outline on this end number here. Hollow, I have a hollow end number over here. By the way, look how nice and readable a hollow end number is. This is actually one of the planes I own. It's a little 1968 Cherokee 180. And the end number for me was an important part of the design. It's got my kids' names in it. And my partner in this plane, his wife is Elizabeth Callaghan. And so it's got her initials on too. So it made it even more important. One question I often get asked about this particular end number style with regard to regulations is it, according to the regulations, the end number is required to be sufficiently contrasting to the background, I think is the wording. It might be a little variation of that, but I think that's the wording. And so they say, well, how can this be sufficiently contrasting to the background? So no problem. I had a client who was an aviation lawyer who wanted to use these end numbers. And he said, no, you don't understand. The reason they're good end numbers is because the background is the white outline, and the gray numbers are sufficiently contrasting to that white outline, and I'll go to court any day of the week on that. And so that gave me a lot more confidence, and we've probably done 1,000 aircraft with this style and number, which I think is very understated, but yet looks really elegant. Okay, so we've talked about design, we've talked about a whole bunch of regulations, N numbers and all kinds of things, hopefully some of which you found interesting. I want to talk to you a little bit about presenting your designs to the paint shop. And not everyone sitting here is an engineer, but I know a lot of you are building aircraft, so you're at least technical people and know how to read drawings and probably know how to draw drawings accurately. And that's what you want to give to the paint shop. You want to try and provide as much dimension as you can. Now, you don't have to be scheme designers, and I'll show you what we do just to give you a sense. But you want to think through how thick are white spaces, how thick are stripes, and give a few key measurements. And you might say, well, how am I supposed to figure that out? Well, obviously we can scale the drawing. But one other way to do it is look at aircraft at your airport and find stripes with the right proportion that you like, with the right negative spaces you like, and just take a ruler or a tape measure and measure them and say, oh, you know what, 1/2 inch for these laser stripes works well for me. This big, bold, squiggly stripe is 2.5 inches at the middle. It's too wide. I would rather have 1.5 inch. So you give yourself a sense of dimension. But you want to approach the whole process fairly professionally. So I pulled a specification. This happens to be the American Bonanza Society's Bonanza that we did for them, that they use for the videos for the American, what do they call it? The AFS, their flight safety organization. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But what we do, and I've only pulled out certain pages, I always show a left and a right view of an aircraft. That's really important because sometimes you need to think through things like different door configurations or no door configurations on the left and right. Sometimes there may be an odd scoop on one side or the other. Sometimes things just look awkward when you turn them around. For some reason, we normally think of the majority of aircraft on the left side. Whenever you see this type of drawing of an aircraft, 99% of the time it's a left side drawing. Most people completely ignore the right side, and if you don't look at it and you don't give the paint shop some kind of perspective, I think it's a real negative when it comes to layout. I also consider hidden detail. So you do want to think what's happening. You might draw some stripes that happen to get hidden by a wing, and you draw them very carefully, and then you've got a wing in the way. I like to show the paint shop what's going on, so I do cut the plane up, and I do break it down into detail. You don't have to do it this way. You could just enlarge parts of the drawing and do it by hand if you wanted to. You could draw the whole scheme out by hand, scale it, measure it, and then hand draw these dimensions on, however you want to do it. But we look at fixed points around the aircraft, like the leading edge of this window. I've got all the dimensions. So we give the paint shop a good idea of all the dimensions. In our case, we go down to 1/8 of an inch for how the scheme is supposed to lay out throughout the aircraft. I describe exactly how I want the registration numbers done. I don't leave that up to chance because, especially if it's 12 inches, it's a big element, and I want to make sure that it looks great on the aircraft. So it's all described, how the angles I wanted at, how big the outline is, 1/4 inch in this case, how big the shadow is, 1/2 inch in this case, and so on. I'm also showing, top and bottom views and wingtip details and wing root details if necessary. And if I've got color on the horizontal tail, I've got details of that. So this is just a sampling of some pages from a specification to give you an idea of what a paint shop likes to receive. We don't let a project go out of our facility without doing a set of detailed drawings like that. So to round off and finish off the presentation, I want to show you 3 or 4 examples of mistakes that happen in the paint shop, and just make you think a little about how important it is to give thought to this whole design process. So this is a scheme I designed a long time ago. It's the 2001 to 2004 Piper Seneca and Piper Saratoga paint scheme. They matched, that we did for Piper. And it was quite a radical scheme for its day. And there were a few key things to remember when you look at the scheme. So one, it had very elegant curves on it. It did have touching colors because I didn't know better right when I was starting. And then it's got a gold stripe that starts somewhere behind the nacelle on the fuselage, goes through the ugly window line, and goes onto the tail. And then it's got this very bold gold stripe on the tail. And the reason that's bold is because there was nothing else going on the tail, and the plane was looking really nose heavy, especially with the color on the nacelles. So we put this pretty bold stripe over here, really important, keeping the plane looking balanced. I found this other picture of this Grumman Cougar that had obviously taken the Seneca scheme and said to the paint shop, I want that on my Cougar. All the elements are here. So you've got this double, a little mountain, and valley again on the side of the fuselage, just like the Seneca. You got the stripe that cuts away. You got this stripe on the tail. But now, look how much more dramatic the curves are on the Cougar, and all the flow that you see on the Seneca is completely lost because the hills and valleys are too large. Look also how this stripe, and in particular this stripe, have become toothpick stripes. They're too skinny and they look ridiculous. And all the benefit of having the stripe there is lost because that stripe no longer has the correct shape, and it no longer provides the visual weight that was needed. So it's very easy when you hand this picture of the Seneca over to your paint shop and say, paint my Cougar, that the design ends up looking really bad. One other thing to show here is, think about colors, particularly if you like silvers. When you use a silver on an aircraft, you want to use a really bold, strong silver that stands up against white. When you use these very light, sparkly silvers, they will disappear from some angles, as you can see happening on the fuselage. I remember at Oshkosh, I saw a Mooney that I did the paint scheme on for the factory, taxi past, and I actually thought to myself, oh, look, they left off that one stripe when they bought their plane. And as he was taxiing away from me, that stripe suddenly reappeared. It was just a silver stripe, and at least, I don't know, 40 feet as it moved past the front of me, that stripe completely vanished. So it can be quite dramatic, and you know, you're paying for that stripe, you want to see it the whole time. Here's another example of how you tell a factory fresh scheme from a copied scheme and some of the mistakes that you see. So obviously an older Bonanza A36 painted in a G36 paint scheme. So this is, apart from the cowling treatment, which I don't like, but otherwise I like the rest of the scheme. I didn't do it, it was done by Beechcraft. All the elements again are here, same problems. Toothpicked stripes, you see how little and skinny this black stripe on the rear fuselage is compared to the Bonanza? Completely loses the effect. Same thing with the red stripe, which has become black over here. If it wasn't there, it wouldn't make a bean of difference in this scheme. Here, it's a major element that adds a lot of interest into the scheme and is really visible. Look at the shape of the black over here and compare it to the completely misdirectioned curve on the bottom edge of this blue stripe over here, as opposed to tying this properly into whatever was going on with the split base over here. Even the B, instead of getting, you can call up Beechcraft, they'll send you the B, they'll send you the file. Instead of getting the Beechcraft B, they made it up themselves. So they got the vertical leg incorrect. Remember, this is the actual B from Beechcraft. This is a hand laid out piece of junk B. And you know, maybe a lot of people won't notice, but when I look at this and I see that the whole B in all these areas is completely wrong, and this is the logo for Beechcraft, it just looks silly to me. So again, not a thought out design. Sometimes you look at a copy and you just wonder what the paint shop was smoking when they were laying it out. I mean, it's just unbelievable. You know where this Cherokee 6 scheme came from. All the elements are there. And by this stage, you know exactly what was wrong. One thing I want to point out on this particular aircraft that we haven't spoken about before is with your registration number, you really want to angle the registration number back, not forward. So this registration number on the Saratoga is angled back. On the Cherokee 6, it's angled forward. And the analogy that I want to use is, you have to think of it in your mind, the Flintstones car in a comic book, not on TV. And when that car is accelerating, the little roof is leaning back, and you know, looking at that comic book picture, that that car is accelerating. And when he's braking, the roof leans forward, and you know that he's decelerating. The same thing with end numbers. When you lean them back, it makes the plane accelerate a little bit visually. When you lean them forward, you're putting on the brakes. So on both sides, lean them back. A lot of people lean them back on one side and then think, oh, well, then it must lean forward on the other side. No, it leans back on both sides. So keep that in mind. Lastly, if you've got an older aircraft and you want to make it look more modern and it's missing an element, get over yourself. Don't paint on windows or do anything stupid to try and make an older plane look like a new plane. Relish the plane you have, not the one that you think it should be. Okay, thus endeth the lesson. This is Revlon's plane from the 60s. I didn't do the design, but polka dots, they do exist on planes, although this plane doesn't exist anymore. I'm done. I'll be happy to take questions. I'll leave the presentation open in case I need to go back to any particular pages. So just if you've got any questions, just hold your space bar down or unmute yourself and shout them out. Don't do it all at once. I couldn't have done that good a job. Okay. No one has questions? Okay, that's pretty.
How much work do you do with, you said that sometimes you use not stickers, latex or vinyl?
Decals. I do a lot. We actually make vinyl decals. We don't make the vinyl, but we cut vinyl decals for entire paint schemes. So we do quite a lot. We'll do them where they are appropriate. So, for example, I have an older Cirrus SR22 that has a vinyl scheme on from the factory. The vinyl is really worn out. I'm getting ready to take it off. I can't afford to repaint the whole plane at this stage, so I'm just going to make up a new vinyl kit and stick it on the plane. It's a smooth fuselage with no rivets and no joints, and the vinyl goes on really easily. And so it's the perfect material. I somewhat limit myself with design. Let me, you know what, I'll take too long if I start opening stuff up elsewhere on the computer. But generally with vinyl, I don't get into wraps. I don't like wraps of vinyl. On an aircraft, there's too many joints and rivets and access panels. And so if you wrap a whole aircraft in a vinyl pattern, to me, that just ends up looking messy. That's point one. Remember, everything I'm telling you now is someone who will sell you vinyl any day of the week and walk away happy with your money in my pocket. Two, vinyl doesn't last as long as paint. If you're going to paint your plane, you're going to spend more money, but you're going to have a job that lasts 50 to 150% more than if you just painted it white and stuck vinyl decals on it. Vinyl decals aren't cheap. Like a typical Cirrus design from us, the whole, you know, for a whole aircraft is around $2,000. If you buy it from Cirrus, it's around $5,000. So when you're painting the aircraft, once you put the base on, the real heavy lifting is done. The stripping, if you've got an older aircraft that you're stripping, the prep of all the fiberglass, whether it's your own aircraft you've built or an older aircraft, the cleaning, the etching, the priming, the application of the paint. That's 75% of the work right there. Cutting your nose off to try and save a few dollars is a bad idea. And if you're in a paint shop, stick with paint. Where I use vinyl more commonly is if I'm putting a logo on the plane. If someone wants to have a picture of their pet dog on the tail, and they're going to one day sell that plane, I don't want their pet dog if I buy their 172. It's easy if you can just remove it. So there's times that I use vinyl, and there's times that I choose not to use vinyl. But my choice is always paint. Vinyl also doesn't have the same luster as paint. you know what I mean? That doesn't have the depth of finish. It looks much more matte-like, and I tend to prefer a solid, deep finish of paint. And also, vinyl doesn't stand up to the elements as well as paint. If not properly applied, or if it's aging, you can lose entire stripes. If it's not properly designed, you can lose entire stripes. So for example, if you put just a single stripe on a plane and it's got a point at the front, and you make that point in vinyl, you end up with so little adhesive at that point that you fly through a bit of rain and it'll readily pick up that point. And once it gets picked up, airflow will take the whole stripe off the aircraft. So all points have to be designed to be rounded so that there's a lot of adhesive at the leading edge of the stripes. If you want to, say, do something really intricate, have a stripe that has a whole pattern on, you can use printed vinyl, which gets you where you want to go without an airbrush artist. But on the other hand, printed vinyl lasts even less time than regular vinyl. Regular vinyl has a sun life of about 7 years, and will start to fade and dry out and crack thereafter. Did that fully answer your question? It was a broad question, so you got a broad answer.
That's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
But if you need vinyl, you know where to find me.
I wanted to thank you for this. You've answered so many questions that I've had for years, and it's going to get me more seriously talking about painting my RV12. Oh,
excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Let me take this away. I appreciate that feedback. And I hope the fact that there aren't a lot of questions is because I covered so much that you can't even think of anything to ask. Rex, when you do start thinking about painting your RV12, if you need a drawing, just send me an email. If you want to write it down, it's craig@schemedesigners.com.
Thank you very much. I'll do that.
And I'll be happy to send you the top view and the side view drawings that are really nice and accurate.
Okay.
Send it in a PDF file. You can draw by hand, or you can take them into any graphics program if you know how to use.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
Visit our website at schemedesigners.com. And again, if you have questions, you want to talk about end numbers, you want to just draw something up yourself and discuss it with me, feel free. I always make this offer whenever I give a talk, and some people take me up on it. Other people come hire us after these talks, but I strongly encourage you when you get the opportunity to paint a plane to think it through. Give me a call. I'll be happy to share whatever you need and give you advice. And that's about all she wrote.